All right, so there's this long-running joke in leftist circles that conservatives, specifically conservative propagandists, don't really seem to possess the capability to understand that frequently when they are giving these critiques of whatever strawman version of socialism or communism that they come up with in the moment, that frequently, without realizing it, they are actually critiquing the capitalist system. And Tim Pool is a perfect example of this, a guy who doesn't really seem to understand anything, but specifically doesn't really seem to be able to accurately define or understand what socialism, communism, anarchism, capitalism, the various nuances and differences between these systems actually are, and basically just cherry picks and chooses whatever he needs in that moment to sell the narrative that he is selling to his viewers. And in the case that we are about to get into right here, he is selling the narrative that communism bad, capitalism good, even in the face of what is basically the most on-the-nose direct criticism of capitalism as I could possibly imagine in Squid Game, this popular Netflix show that came out recently. I mean, it is literally, the creator of the show came out and said it is a critique of capitalism. The entire show is in absolutely not a subtle way as possible critiquing capitalism, and still Tim Pool comes to this conclusion.
Squid Game.
Yeah.
We should talk about Squid Game.
Yeah.
What about it?
So I think Squid Game is, I don't think it's overtly political. Apparently, you were telling me, Gary, that it was like, there's like a political message in Squid Game.
Yeah, the writer, at least that's what he said.
My takeaway from it was communism bad. That was my takeaway from it.
All right, so pause already, okay? We're like 3 sentences in this, okay? And Tim Pool already doesn't understand anything about the show that he apparently watched in its entirety, okay? How could you possibly watch Squid Game? And again, spoiler alerts, go and watch the show before you actually watch this video, but it is not subtle in any way, shape, or form that this is a political commentary, okay? And not only that, but it's not subtle at all that it is a specific critique of capitalism, okay? It takes place in South Korea, which is a capitalist system. They are describing the process of how people have become indebted, and they are basically, the outline of the show is that people are so indebted and brutalized by the capitalist system within South Korea that they resort to basically accepting an offer to go compete in these games that are brutal, and that many people actually die as a result of competing in these games, all for the potential small prospect of, at the end of the game, if you are the person that wins, being able to take home a cash prize that would allow you to relieve many of the debts and potentially help out some of your family members. And so the entire commentary of the show is this capitalist system is unsustainable for thousands and thousands of people, and these people are being put in the position where they are so desperate that they would be willing to literally sacrifice their lives for just the chance of being able to relieve those debt burdens, okay? This is something that exists under a capitalist system, and Tim Pool still thinks, first of all, that it's somehow an apolitical message within the show, and then if it is going to be a political message, that it's actually communism bad, okay? So just laughably absurd and stupid at face value, but they continue here, first giving a couple of spoiler warnings, but...
Okay, so now I'm going to say this, for those that are listening, spoiler alert, if you haven't finished Squid Game, it's an awesome show.
Yeah.
I prefer watching it in the original Korean with subtitles. I think it's fantastic. With the dub, you lose a lot of that like reverb and like natural sound. It's kind of weird. So spoiler alert, I'm going to say it again. We are going to spoil this show to
Kingdom Come.
To Kingdom Come. There we go. Spoiler alert. So what was it about? You mentioned that the creator had said something and it was like...
The creator called it a fable for modern day capitalism, but also for life and the competitiveness of life. And that message, it's not subtle at the end, which I won't ruin for anybody, but it's not subtle at the end. And that messaging was there, and some people can't get past it, and I understand that. But I thought it was a damn good story.
But what was the messaging? Like, what do you think the message conveyed?
Well, basically it's a cold and cruel system. There in that fable, there is no resolution except for at the end they create their own enemy, quote unquote. But that's what I got out of it.
All right. Just for context, okay, because those of you that are sticking around, even though we told you spoilers are here, I'm going to give you the quick breakdown of the show. It's a bunch of desperate people in debt, and then all of a sudden they get an opportunity to play in a game, but the game is brutal and you die in it. But if you don't, you win. I think it's like equivalent of US like $35 to $40 million is the translation. So it's like 45 billion Korean won or something. Now we're going to get into, again, I warned you, spoilers. I think the whole thing is the perfect example of somebody who thinks they're opposing capitalism, but just makes communism and wokeness look really, really dumb. And the show ends up being, in my opinion, more anti-communist than anything. So one of the big themes in the show is that everyone is equal. They all enter the game as equals, and they're allowed to play as equals. And there's an arc in the show where it's like, somebody violates the equality, and so they kill him. And there
All right, so pause, because this is actually a pretty important point here. One, he's completely skipping over the part where the people who were picked to compete in this game were specifically targeted as some of the most downtrodden and brutalized people within the society, okay? So the guys who were going around trying to recruit people for this game were specifically going after people who had large amounts of debt. I mean, they say that explicitly in the show. Don't know how Tim Pool missed that, but they literally say explicitly in the show that everybody that is participating within the competition has a large amount of debt, okay? So that's a central piece of the show. Again, don't really know how we missed that, but the equality part, they were specifically targeted to participate in these games because of the inequality baked within the capitalist system of the country that they were living in. Then you get to the point of the show where, yes, they do actually kill people who end up cheating, right? So they say this is about equality. You have to be on equal footing in this competition. But I think that's more of a commentary on the fact that we learned later on in the show that there were millionaires or billionaires, elitists within this society that were going there to watch this competition unfold, and they were betting on people within the competition. So it would make much more sense that the equality within the show is more of an insistence that the billionaires and the millionaires who are betting on these people's lives would have an even playing field, more than it would be an actual concern for equality or a broader message in that sense. But of course, Tim Pool not going to understand any of that.
or like that's the worst thing you could have done is strip the equality. But now, here's how the show ends. You've been warned. In this equal system, everyone dies but one person who gets all of the money.
Huh.
Okay, so that doesn't sound to me like capitalism. In capitalism, we recognize not everybody is equal. Not everybody does have an equal chance. We do want equal opportunity, but some people are poor and some people are rich.
Okay, pause already. Again, what the fuck are you talking about, man? Capitalism is not a system in which the tiny minority at the top collect the vast proportions of the proceeds, the profits, if you want to call it that, the value within the economy. What are you talking about? That is the capitalist system. We literally have people like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk that are worth upwards of $200 billion. The top 1% control more wealth than the bottom 90% within this country. And this guy is talking about capitalism as if it's a system that, even in a tiny marginal way, produces a level playing field for anybody. We don't have a meritocracy in this system, as Tim Pool would like to pretend that we have. We don't have a meritocracy in this system. The system is entirely rigged against people who would have ended up having to go and play in the Squid Game, right? It's completely targeted against people like that, and specifically to the benefit of the wealthy benefactors who sit at the top of this system, okay? I don't know how he's confusing these systems again, but apparently he thinks that an unequal economic system where the distribution is specifically skewed towards the top and protecting their interests, the elitist interests, somehow that's communism instead of capitalism. Don't know how you could possibly come to that conclusion, understanding how our current capitalist system functions here in the United States. But he continues.
In this system, everyone is wearing the same clothes in the same room, being brutalized by the powers that ultimately results in one person having all the wealth and everyone dying. That is not capitalism. In capitalism, there's too much food. People are morbidly obese, and there are homeless people who are fat.
Okay, again, time out already. First of all, he said communism is when everybody wears the same clothes. What? Communism is when same clothes. Okay, I'm starting to understand Tim Pool's logic here a little bit. So, therefore, under that same Tim Pool logic, the NFL, the NBA, every other team sport, any situation where you have to wear some sort of a uniform is communism, okay? Apparently that's what he thinks communism is. But then on top of that, he goes on to talk about how a capitalist system is supposed to be functioning, and this is not how a capitalist system functions. He describes inequality within our food systems, okay, under communism versus under capitalism. Capitalism does produce an excess of food quantity, but guess what? Because of the structure and the for-profit nature of that capitalist system, those extras, they don't get given out to the rest of the people who are starving in the streets of America. They get discarded. They get protected by the violent force of the U.S. in the form of whether it's the police or the military, depending on whether it's domestically or internationally. We literally saw a case study example of this during the pandemic. And just to give you a perspective on how many Americans are hungry in this country, right? As Tim Pool continues to say that we have an abundance of food, apparently nearly 1 in 4 households in America have experienced food insecurity this year. This is during a pandemic. 1 in 4 American households are hungry, okay? So this is the situation that we actually have under our capitalist system here in the United States. Tim Pool apparently claiming that we have an abundance of food, which again, we do, but not in the way that he's suggesting. Again, we had a perfect case study of this during the pandemic. There was literally a story came out where police were guarding with guns a dumpster behind a grocery store to protect the profit margins of that grocery store and prevent starving people from being able to get access to the food that they had discarded at the end of the day. So yes, capitalism produces an abundance of many things, but the access to that abundance is completely restricted, and restricted in a violent way by our police state. And so he completely disregards that fact, but he continues again.
In communism, everybody wears the same clothes. They have limited access to anything. They get garbage food every day. They're like, okay, the game's over. Here's the food you get. And they get trash. Yeah. And they're...
All right, literally, this pisses me off more than really almost anything else that he says, because, listen, I live in Atlanta. We have a significant homeless problem here. I see people eating out of garbage cans every fucking day in this city, okay? So for him to go out there and pretend as if homeless people are fat here in the United States, that all homeless people who are out on the streets, desperate and starving, that these people are just lazy, or that they just don't want to work, and they're not adequate enough for our capitalist system, instead of people who have been thoroughly brutalized and had our social systems completely unable to take care of them in this way, it's just disgusting to pretend as if the problem is lazy homeless people instead of a system that allows people to get pushed to the brink where they're having to go and dig out of trash cans in populous, wealthy cities like the one that I happen to live in. But just a side note there, that pisses me off really more than anything else. But he continues.
Fighting each other because they're starving. That to me is an indictment of communism. And if this guy who made the show is actually like, it's actually capitalism that's bad, I'm like, it just goes to show this is a person who made a great show but was really dumb and didn't understand they were actually critiquing communism.
It's like they took him out of a capitalistic system where they were doing pretty bad to a communistic system where they were doing really, really bad and were executed by the state, which usually happens under communism.
Right.
I mean,
for like childish whims.
Exactly. And that.
All right, so they proceed to go and talk about the Rothschilds and get into some like weird borderline anti-Semitic talking points that they go into there, again describing capitalism as they continue to pretend to critique communism. But especially what that guy just said at the end is laughably ridiculous, that state violence is somehow unique to a communist country. What the fuck? Do you not know what country we are living in? That the United States doesn't have a propensity for state violence, for state executions? We are one of the only developed countries in the entire world, if not the only developed country in the entire world, that still does state executions, that executes prisoners, many of whom are completely innocent and are later exonerated after being executed by the state. Not to mention the thousands and thousands of police murders that we have every single year, more than any other country on earth by far. Don't know what the fuck these guys are talking about. Again, all this really boils down to is the perfect example that we continuously have to deal with as leftists, as socialists, that capitalists not only cannot accurately define what any of these terms mean, how any of these systems actually function, but they continue to just repeatedly, as if it's just a record player, continuously, repeatedly say, capitalism good, communism bad, and whenever there's consequences associated with capitalism, that must be communism somehow.